The arrival at the temple. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant murmur of a hidden stream. A narrow path wound its way through ancient trees, leading to a temple perched on the edge of a cliff. It had stood there, for centuries, silent, unmoving, like a guardian watching over the valley below. Kaito, a young man in his early 30s, climbed the final stone steps, his breath heavy with frustration. His mind churned with anger, replaying the words that had stung him like 1,000 needles. In the village there were those who mocked him, colleagues who dismissed his ideas, friends who took his kindness for weakness, even family members who questioned his every decision. He had tried to ignore it, to rise above it. But the weight of their words pressed down on him, making his heart heavy, and so he had come here. To him, Master Haru. A man of few words but boundless wisdom, the old Zen master was known throughout the region. Some traveled for days just to hear him speak. Others left after a single conversation, shaken by the clarity of his truth. They said he had a way of revealing the answers hidden deep within a person's soul, answers they had always known but never dared to face. Kaito had never met him before, but he had heard the stories, and now, standing at the entrance of the temple, he felt a sudden uncertainty. Would the master have an answer for him? Or would he, like everyone else, dismiss his struggles as trivial? A soft breeze rustled the temple's wind chimes, filling the space with a sound so delicate it felt like time itself had paused to listen. Taking a deep breath, Kaito stepped inside. Master Haru was seated on a wooden platform, his posture straight, his presence as calm as the surface of a still lake. His robes, worn and simple, draped over him like time itself, had softened their fabric. His eyes, deep and unreadable, met Kaito's as the young man hesitated. For a moment neither spoke. Then Kaito exhaled sharply, unable to hold it in any longer. "Master," he said, his voice edged with frustration, "how do you deal with people who do not respect you?" Master Haru studied him for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he simply stared. The silence stretched between them. Seconds passed, then longer. Kaito felt something shift, the weight of his own words settling in the stillness. And in that moment, before the master had spoken a single syllable, Kaito realized, this was already the beginning of his answer. If you've ever struggled with dealing with people who don't respect you, you're not alone. In this journey, we'll explore the wisdom of silence, the power of presence, and the art of holding your head high. If this resonates with you, consider supporting our channel. Subscribe for more insights on mindfulness, self-respect, and the philosophy of inner strength. Now, let's step deeper into the lessons of the Zen master. The silent stare. The mirror of truth. The weight of Master Haru's gaze was unlike anything Kaito had ever felt. It was not cold, nor was it filled with judgment. It was steady, unshaken, like the gaze of the mountain that had watched over the valley for centuries. There was no anger, no impatience, just an unwavering presence that seemed to strip away all pretense, leaving only truth behind. Kaito shifted uncomfortably. He had come here seeking wisdom, seeking words that would teach him how to silence those who disrespected him. But now, standing before the master, feeling the weight of his silence pressing in around him, he felt something he did not expect: self-awareness. The temple was quiet, except for the occasional rustling of leaves. Outside, the wind chimes had stilled. Even the distant birds seemed to hold their breath. Kaito clenched his fists. Did the master not hear him? Did he not understand how frustrating it was to be interrupted, dismissed, belittled? His chest tightened, with the familiar irritation that had led him here in the first place. Finally, unable to endure the silence any longer, he blurted out, "Why aren't you saying anything?" Master Haru's expression did not change. He simply continued to look at Kaito, his gaze as calm as ever. A strange sensation crawled up Kaito's spine. His anger, which had burned so fiercely moments ago, suddenly felt misplaced. There was no resistance in the master's stare, no argument to be had. Instead, it felt as though he was looking through him, beyond the surface of his frustration, into something deeper. And then it struck him. This was exactly what he had needed. In the village, when people mocked him, when they spoke over him, when they made him feel invisible, he had always reacted. He had fought to be heard, to defend himself, to prove his worth. And yet, every time he did, it only fueled their behavior. His anger became their entertainment, his frustration their satisfaction. But here, standing before a man who refused to engage in that game, he felt something shift. Master Haru was not ignoring him. He was not dismissing his feelings. He was simply refusing to participate in the energy Kaito had brought with him. Kaito exhaled, his shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. "I see," he murmured. The corner of the master's lips lifted in the slightest hint of a smile. He gestured for Kaito to sit, and when the young man lowered himself onto the wooden floor, Haru finally spoke. "People who seek to diminish others," the master said, his voice calm and measured, "are often looking for something, a reaction, a sign that their words have power. When you give them what they seek, you confirm their influence over you." Kaito thought back to all the times he had argued, explained, justified himself. Every time he had raised his voice, every time he had tried to prove himself to those who had already made up their minds, he had handed them exactly what they wanted, his energy. "But what if I don't respond at all?" Kaito asked, his voice quieter now. Master Haru placed a small bowl of water between them. The surface was still perfectly smooth. "Speak into it," Haru instructed. Confused, Kaito leaned forward. "Hello?" he said. The water remained undisturbed. "Now strike it," the master said. Kaito hesitated, then tapped the side of the bowl. Ripples spread across the surface, distorting the reflection of the temple's wooden beams above them. "Disrespect is like a hand striking water," Haru said. "If you react, the disturbance spreads, but if you remain still, the insult cannot take hold, it has nowhere to land." Kaito stared at the water, watching as the ripples slowly faded until the surface was smooth once more. "All this time," he murmured, "I thought silence was weakness, that if I didn't respond, I was letting them win." Master Haru shook his head. "No, Kaito. True power is knowing when not to respond. It is in the stillness that strength is revealed." The young man felt something shift inside him. The weight he had carried, the need to fight for validation, suddenly seemed unnecessary. He didn't need to prove himself to those who had no intention of understanding him. He didn't need to engage in battles that drained his spirit. All he needed to do was be. Master Haru reached for the bowl of water, and with a gentle motion tipped it forward. The water spilled over the wooden floor, soaking into the grains of the aged wood. "The ripples only last as long as the water remains in the bowl," he said. "When you empty yourself of the need for validation, there is nothing left for their words to disturb." Kaito bowed his head, understanding now what no amount of arguments or explanations could have taught him. The greatest response to disrespect was not anger. It was not justification. It was the silent, unshaken knowledge of one's own worth, the power of silence, the echo of the mountain. The morning mist clung to the mountainside as Master Haru and Kaito walked in silence. The path was narrow, carved into the rock over centuries, winding its way higher and higher. The young man's mind was still unraveling the lesson from the day before, the silent stare that had stripped him of his anger and forced him to see himself more clearly. But a part of him still hesitated. He understood that refusing to engage with those who disrespected him could shift the balance of power. But silence felt passive. It felt like surrender. If someone insulted him, if they challenged his choices, was he simply supposed to say nothing, to let their words hang in the air unanswered? As if sensing his thoughts, Master Haru finally spoke. "Tell me, Kaito," he said, his voice steady as the ground beneath them. "If a man yells into the mountain, what does he hear in return?" Kaito glanced at him, unsure if this was a riddle or if the master truly expected an answer. He looked up at the towering cliffs around them, the peaks rising into the clouds. "An echo," he said finally. Master Haru nodded. "And if he remains silent?" Kaito frowned. The answer was obvious, yet something about the question unsettled him. Then there is no echo. The master stopped walking. They had reached a clearing where the valley stretched out before them, endless and vast. The sky was pale gold, the sun just beginning to break through the mist. Haru turned to face the mountain behind them. Then, with a force that surprised Kaito, he let out a single, sharp shout. The sound crashed against the cliffs and returned. A second later, ringing through the air, bouncing from rock to rock like a restless spirit. Then he fell silent. They waited. This time, there was nothing. The mountain gave no response. The world around them remained still. Kaito understood. The mountain did not choose which words to return. It simply echoed whatever was given to it. When met with noise, it answered with noise. When met with silence, it kept its peace. Master Haru turned to him. People who insult you, who belittle you, who seek to pull you into their chaos, they are shouting into the mountain. They want to hear the echo of their own anger, their own insecurities. They want your voice to confirm their importance. He paused, his gaze steady. But you do not have to be their mountain. Kaito looked down at his hands. He thought of all the times he had argued back, defended himself, tried to explain, to reason, to fight. And what had it accomplished? Had anyone who truly disrespected him ever been convinced by his words, or had they simply enjoyed the power they had over his emotions? The young man exhaled. So, when someone disrespects me, I should just say, nothing? Master Haru smiled. Silence is not the absence of action, Kaito. It is a choice, a powerful one. Kaito frowned, still unconvinced. But if I stay silent, won't they think they've won? That I am weak? The master gestured toward the valley below. Do you see the river? Kaito followed his gaze. A thin silver ribbon wound its way through the valley, carving through the land, shaping it over time. The river does not argue with the rocks in its path. It does not waste its energy proving that it is stronger. It simply moves forward, shaping the land without a single word. Kaito stared at the river for a long time. Silence was not surrender. It was not weakness. It was a quiet, undeniable force. Like the river that carved mountains, like the wind that shaped the trees, like time itself. And just like that, he realized something else. For years he had given his voice, his energy, to people who did not deserve it. He had fought to be understood by those who had no intention of listening, and in doing so, he had let them dictate his peace. No more. The next time someone disrespected him, he would not argue. He would not justify. He would not let them hear the echo they were hoping for. He would be the silence that swallowed their words whole. Stop explaining yourself. The falling leaf, the afternoon sun filtered through the maple trees surrounding the temple, casting shifting patterns of gold and amber on the ground. Kaito sat beside Master Haru near a quiet stream, the water flowing, endlessly over smooth stones, whispering secrets only nature could understand. He had learned much in his time at the temple, yet one thing still lingered in his mind, unresolved. Master, Kaito finally said, breaking the silence. What? If people question my choices, what if they demand to know why I live the way I do, why I make the decisions I make? If I don't explain myself, won't they think I have something to hide? Master Haru didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the air and plucked a single red maple leaf from a low-hanging branch. He twirled it between his fingers. For a moment, then released it. Kaito watched as the leaf drifted down, twisting and turning in the breeze, before landing softly on the surface of the stream. It floated there, carried effortlessly by the current, neither resisting nor questioning where it was going. Haru gestured toward it. Tell me, Kaito, do you think the leaf worries about justifying why it fell? Kaito blinked, taken aback by the question. No, of course not. It just falls, the master nodded. And does the river stop to ask why the leaf has joined its path? No, Kaito said slowly, following the leaf with his gaze. Haru smiled. Yet the river carries it all the same. The young man exhaled. He knew there was a lesson here, but he wasn't sure if he fully grasped it. He thought of all the times he had defended his choices, his career, his relationships, his way of thinking. He thought of how exhausting it was to constantly prove himself to others, who never seemed satisfied with his answers. Master Haru placed a hand on his shoulder, his touch light but grounding. Kaito, people will always question what they do, not understand. And when they cannot see the path you walk, they will ask you to explain it to them, not because they wish to understand, but because they wish to measure it against their own. Kaito's heart clenched. He remembered when he had chosen to leave his stable job to pursue something that gave him meaning. His family had demanded explanations, his friends had doubted him, colleagues had scoffed at his decision. No matter how much he explained, no matter how carefully he laid out his reasoning, their skepticism never faded. It is not explanations they seek, the master continued. It is permission, validation that their own choices are the correct ones. And when your path does not match theirs, they will try to pull you back, to make you question yourself. Not because they are right, but because your certainty unsettles them. Kaito swallowed hard. He had always thought that if he just found the right words, the perfect way to explain himself, people would finally understand. But no matter how much he justified, the questions never stopped. It was as if his words were never enough. Master Haru picked up a small stone and tossed it into the stream. The ripples expanded outward, distorting the reflection of the trees above. A life spent explaining oneself is like this water, always disturbed, never still. But a life lived in certainty. He gestured to the parts of the stream that remained undisturbed. It flows, without asking permission. Kaito let the words settle in his mind, feeling them take root in a way that explanations never had. For years he had given his energy to convincing others of his worth, of his path. But the truth was, he didn't owe anyone an explanation. His life, his choices, they were his own. Like the leaf that fell without asking permission, like the river that carried it without question, he was meant to move forward, unburdened by the weight of justification. The young man let out a slow breath and nodded. "I understand now," he said. Master Haru smiled, then let go. And for the first time in his life, Kaito did. Keeping your distance. The fire and the shadow. The evening air was crisp as the last remnants of daylight faded beyond the horizon. The temple courtyard was bathed in the soft glow of lanterns, their flickering light casting long, restless shadows against the worn wooden beams. Kaito sat across from Master Haru, watching as the old man carefully built a fire in the stone pit between them. The flames started small, licking at the dried branches, crackling softly as they grew. Kaito stared into the fire, lost in thought. His time at the temple had changed him, but one question still lingered. "Master," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what if the people who disrespect me are the ones I cannot avoid? What if they are family, friends I have known for years?" Master Haru did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached out, extending his hands toward the fire. Kaito did the same, feeling the warmth seep into his skin. "How does this fire feel?" Haru asked. "Warm," Kaito replied. "Comforting." The master nodded. Then, without warning, he pushed his hands too close to the flames. The heat flared, biting at his skin, and he quickly pulled away. "And now?" Haru asked. Kaito frowned. "Too close, and it burns." Haru settled back, his gaze steady. "People are the same, Kaito. Some bring warmth, light, and comfort to your life. But if you stand too close to those who burn with cruelty, resentment, or disrespect, you will be the one who suffers." Kaito's breath caught in his chest. He thought of the people in his life who made him feel small, the ones who never had a kind word, who dismissed his dreams, who treated him as though he were always just slightly unworthy. He had spent years trying to earn their approval, enduring their criticism because he believed that was what loyalty required. "But Master," Kaito hesitated, "if I step away, doesn't that mean I am abandoning them?" Master Haru picked up a long stick and pressed it into the fire. The tip quickly blackened, glowing red as the heat consumed it. He lifted it, watching as embers crumbled into the wind. "Does the shadow abandon the fire when it steps back?" he asked. Kaito blinked, unsure of what he meant. "The shadow remains," Haru continued, "but it knows its place. It does not throw itself into the flames, nor does it disappear entirely. It simply finds the distance where it can exist without being destroyed. Something in Kaito's chest tightened. He had always thought distance meant loss, that if he stepped away from those who hurt him, he would be left with nothing. But as he looked at the fire, at the way the shadows stretched and shifted but never vanished, he realized something. Distance was not abandonment, it was self-preservation. The people who truly cared for him, who respected him, would not demand that he stand in their flames. They would understand if he needed space, and the ones who resented his absence, perhaps they had only wanted him close so they could keep burning him. Kaito looked at Master Haru, his voice quieter now. So I don't have to stay close to those who hurt me even if I care about them. The master smiled, his face illuminated by the golden light. Caring for someone does not mean allowing them to harm you. You can love a fire from a distance, Kaito. You can appreciate its warmth without letting it consume you. Kaito turned his gaze back to the fire, watching the flames dance. He had always believed that to prove his loyalty, his strength, he had to endure. But now he understood. True strength was knowing when to step back. As the embers crackled and the night deepened, Kaito made a silent promise to himself. He would no longer stand too close to the fire. Holding your head high, the mountain that never bows. The morning air was sharp and cold as Kaito followed Master Haru up the narrow, winding path that led toward the temple's highest peak. The climb was steep, the wind relentless, but the old master moved with steady, deliberate steps, undisturbed by the elements. Kaito, on the other hand, struggled against the biting wind, his breath heavy, his legs burning from the ascent. "Master," Kaito called out, trying to be heard over the howling wind. "Why are we climbing so high?" Master Haru did not stop, nor did he turn around. "Because you need to see what stands above the storm." Kaito frowned, but said nothing. He focused on keeping pace, pushing forward until, at last, they reached the summit. The world stretched endlessly before them, rolling hills, rivers carving their way through the land, the village barely visible in the far distance. The sky was endless, a vast expanse of blue, and below them, the wind roared through the valleys, bending trees, shaking the earth. Yet the mountain remained, unmoved, steady, eternal. Master Haru turned to Kaito, his robes billowing slightly in the wind. "Tell me, Kaito, does the mountain bow when the wind blows?" Kaito shook his head. "No, it stays where it is." Haru nodded. "And yet, the wind still tries. It howls, it pushes, it rages, but the mountain does not lower itself to meet it." Kaito exhaled, watching the way the clouds drifted past them, as if they too had no power over the earth beneath them. "For most of your life," Haru continued, "you have bowed to the voices of others. When they questioned your choices, you explained yourself. When they disrespected you, you sought to prove your worth. When they doubted you, you worked harder, trying to convince them. But tell me, Kaito, did they ever stop? Did your efforts ever make them see your value?" Kaito lowered his gaze, a bitter truth settling in his chest. No matter how much he had explained, no matter how much he had tried to earn respect, there were always those who refused to see him as enough. And in his endless attempts to justify himself, he had done something he had never realized. He had bowed, again and again. Master Haru placed a hand on Kaito's shoulder. "You are not meant to bow to the wind, Kaito. You are meant to stand just as the mountain does." A lump formed in Kaito's throat. He had always believed that confidence came from being accepted, from having others acknowledge his worth. But here, standing above the world, he saw the truth. The mountain did not seek validation. It did not bend itself to fit the expectations of the wind. It simply was, and that was enough. Master Haru turned to leave, but before he did, he spoke one final time. "When you walk back down this mountain, the wind will still be waiting. It will try to shake you to make you bow as you once did. But if you remember this place, if you remember what it means to stand tall, nothing they say will ever touch you again." Kaito remained on the peak long after the master had gone, letting the wind rush past him, feeling its presence but no longer fearing its force. For the first time in his life, he did not try to resist it, nor did he try to answer. Yet he simply stood, and the wind moved around him. The wisdom of the Zen master. The path down the mountain felt different. The wind still blew, the trees still whispered, but Kaito no longer saw them as obstacles. They were simply part of the world, just as he was. For so long he had believed that respect was something to be earned through explanations, defenses, and struggle. He had exhausted himself proving his worth to those who had no intention of seeing it. He had thought that silence was weakness, that distance was abandonment, that confidence required validation. But Master Haru had shown him the truth. Respect was not something to be begged for. It was something to be lived. The silent stare had taught him that he did not need to react to disrespect. The mountain did not tremble before the storm, and he did not need to shrink before those who sought to diminish him. The power of silence had shown him that not every battle needed to be fought. Some words were meant to fade into nothingness, just as an unanswered echo disappeared into the air. The falling leaf had taught him that he owed no one an explanation for the way he chose to live. The river carried the leaf without question, and so too would life carry him forward, whether others approved or not. The fire had taught him that distance was not cruelty, but self-preservation. He could care for people without allowing their flames to burn him. And finally, the mountain had taught him that true confidence was not found in convincing others of his worth. It was found in standing tall, unshaken, knowing that his value was never dependent on their opinions. As the temple came into view, Kaito felt lighter. He was no longer carrying the weight of proving himself. He was no longer fighting battles that did not need to be fought. He was no longer bowing to the winds of other people's judgments. Instead, he was standing, firm, rooted, at peace. Master Haru was waiting for him at the entrance, as if he had known exactly when Kaito would return. He said nothing, only offering a small nod of acknowledgement. And for the first time, Kaito did not feel the need to fill the silence with words. He simply bowed. Then he turned, stepping forward into his life. Not to seek approval, not to explain, not to fight, but to live. In our own lives, we will meet people who do not respect us, who challenge our worth, who question our choices. But remember this, your value is not up for debate. Like the mountain, you do not need to bow. Like the river, you do not need to justify your path. Like the fire, you have the right to keep your distance. And like the leaf, you are free to move without asking permission. If this story has resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on where in your life you may be seeking validation that you do not need. And if you found wisdom here, consider supporting our channel. Subscribe for more stories that inspire strength, mindfulness, and self-respect. Stand tall, move forward, and let the wind pass around you.